Just ahead on this edition of Backstage at the Doudna, we sit down with jazz musicians Dennis Mackrel and Jeffrey Campbell. Along with pianist Reggie Thomas, these three musicians were guest artists at the 55th Annual EIU Jazz Festival. That's just ahead on this edition of Backstage at the Doudna, so don't go away. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Backstage at the Doudna. I'm Dwight Vaught. This show is all about jazz. In February 2014, during a winter storm, we hosted the Dennis Mackrel Trio. Each year, Eastern is home to a jazz festival that includes competition and performances for area middle school and high school jazz bands. As a part of the event, the Dennis Mackrel Trio performed for the opening concert, and we had the chance to sit down and talk with Dennis and bass player Jeffrey Campbell. Jeff and Dennis, thanks for joining us. We're on the stage of the Dvorak Concert Hall here at the Doudna Fine Arts Center on the campus of Eastern Illinois University. It is the middle of February and it is cold outside, so all of our folks will remember back in February when we had the cold snap, and it was quite an adventure getting all of you here. Reggie's not quite here yet, but the three of you will be our guest artists at the 55th Annual EIU Jazz Festival, so we appreciate your being here. I understand that you had a bit of a, Jeff, you had a bit of a travail getting here.
Mild travail. I live in Rochester, New York. All the flights that I was supposed to be on were bumped back, and I knew if I didn't get to St. Louis where Dennis and I were going to meet up, it was going to really back the trip up. So I just had my wife drive me to Buffalo. That was easy. It was the sitting on the airplane when we got to Detroit that they couldn't get the door open. And Dennis and I were texting back and forth, and I said, I'm on the way. As soon as, and I was luckily right in the front of the plane, but I literally had to run down. Dennis was keeping a vigil right by the other gate, and as soon as we got there, we said hello, and the lady said, "Stop talking, you two, get on the plane," you know. We made it.
And your flight was easy compared to that.
It was. The flight I had was coming from Detroit. It was a little bit late getting in, but there was no problems, there was no stress, which was kind of a change, because usually there always is a problem or stress. I just made the connection. I was just sitting there thinking about Jeff and thinking, boy, I'm sure glad it's not me having to do this. I'm glad he's best suited for it.
Well, we're fortunate in that the last 5 years of the Doudna, we have never canceled a show because of the weather. So we're glad that you've kept our winning streak going. So very quickly, just in a minute or less, can you give us a synopsis of your musical life and sort of how you maybe chose the instrument you did and how you got to choose, in this case, jazz predominantly, and just sort of what brought us to where we're at right now?
I don't believe that you choose the musical instrument. I think it chooses you, and at least that was my case. I was born into a family of jazz lovers. Music was playing all the time, and my mother says that when I was just a baby, I just picked up 2 chopsticks and started beating on everything, and she said, "My God, he's a drummer," and that was it.
Well, I come from a musical family also. My dad's a drummer, and I figured out relatively young in life that if I wanted to work with my dad, I couldn't be a drummer. And though I was kind of a drummer for a long time, so I chose the bass, and that allowed me to work professionally with my father a lot. So that's kind of what got me to where I am now.
Drummer, your bass, Reggie, who will be here, is the piano player. But you also played bass for a while, and you played drums for a while. So the two of you have a really good interconnection of what's going on in each other's head.
Yeah.
I think it's important for all musicians to at least have an understanding of what other musicians go through or their process. I got into playing bass because I'd played drums for all my life up to that point, but I was so fascinated with sound, I just wanted to reach out and figure out what else was going on. And I think it makes me appreciate playing with really great bass players like Jeff, because I know I can't do that. So.
Well, and I would say the same thing coming from the other point of view, because I know what it takes to play the drums, sort of, and when Dennis makes it look so easy, then I realize how great he is, you know.
The three of you work together as trios. You also work with other combos and larger jazz ensembles, like you'll be doing with the students here. Talk a little bit about the nuance of the trio, you know, what it means it's different from playing with a big band.
Well, the first thing is that, and then an analogy I like to give, if you think about like a large aircraft, like a 747 or a 777 or whatever, larger aircrafts when they fly, even though they have an appearance of being very graceful, they still can be very heavy and cumbersome. Where the smaller aircraft, are much more nimble. I think in the relationship between the musicians as a trio, you can telegraph things a little bit quicker. It's in a way, in some ways, very, very intimate. And you can stop and turn on a dime and do all kinds of things very, very quickly, where with a big band, it's a lot more responsibility and it's a lot more, in some ways, structured. So I think there's more freedom, I find, with the trio than with the big band, where you're carrying all the responsibility.
I think a trio is interesting because it actually has quite a few different dynamics there. It can be duets between drum and bass, piano and bass, and so forth, or we can go down to soloists. So we actually have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different combinations, speaking to the flexibility part of that. So that also exists. Plus, we can design arrangements on the spot or on the fly, or we can roar like a big band, or whisper, you know, so it's very flexible. Yeah.
Talk about education for a minute. In this case, since the folks who will be coming to hear you in concert will hear you from this point of view, where you're on stage performing for them, some will say that jazz is a bit of an acquired taste, or it takes a bit of a knowledge base, much like classical music. What kind of tips or tidbits could you give folks who maybe not listen to a lot of jazz, but they like the sound of it? How can we increase their knowledge? What do you want them to hear as you're playing on stage? Like your top 10 list. You know, listen for this, listen for that. Here's how we work together. Any of those kinds of things.
First of all, I wish that people would come in and not expect to hear a particular genre, like, okay, this is jazz, or this is pop, or this is whatever. Music is music. I think we've given the labels that have put borders or boundaries on music, to where when people come in, they think, oh, well, I don't like jazz, or I don't know what it is, I don't know what to expect. I think with anything, even in the youngest child, if a child walks into a room and hears something that's interesting, that's kind of making a move, it's good. They don't put a label on it. So that'd be the first thing. Again, I would break it all. If you like it, does your head kind of move? If that's a good sign. Does it make you smile? If it does, that's a good sign. You know, we can talk about the structure of a tune or all those type of things. But again, for me, I think that one of the problems that we have in music is that people think they should be more aware of stuff instead of just coming in a very pure and a very simple first time. Either I like it or I don't like it. Is it good? What do I think?
I think part of that, I agree with that, because we're really just trying to share joy and happiness. Yeah. You know, the 3 of us, we're very good friends. We get along very well, and we're really glad to be here to play. And I think because we are so joyful about the music, we want to pass that along to the people who come here to listen, because that's how we feel about it. Yeah, there are some technical things about the melody, like you said, and in fact, it's pretty interesting because most of our jazz songs are only like 32 measures long, and we can get 10, 12 minutes out of that 32 bars. But we use tools of paying attention. We use tools of aiming toward arrival points. Some of those are technical things, but basically we want it to be an enjoyable, emotional experience.
Compositions that you'll be doing as a trio, are those written by somebody else or some original compositions? Where do you find the literature that the three of you want to work on together?
A lot of it will depend, for example, on the audience. Like usually I don't try to come with a set list of songs. I mean, we have a book and we have a lot of music, but you know, a lot of times I'll look in the audience and I'll see who's out there, and depending on what it is that they need or where they're at. Usually in terms of just sticking with standards, that's the first thing. People, something hopefully that they'll recognize. There are, depending on time and how things go, some originals. But again, I think what I find, and from all of the great leaders that I've had a chance to work with, they never try to over-intellectualize what should be a very simple and very organic thing. You know, hopefully play music that people either can relate to in some way. We'll definitely play a blues at least. We'll start. I'll give that. We'll play a blues at least.
I won't be surprised if Reggie, our pianist, will also gauge the audience in some way, and he'll get a little twinkle in his eye, and we will know that there'll be a piece. He'll surprise us for a moment, but we'll know exactly where he's going. And usually in a trio setting, the piano is a de facto leader in some ways, and Dennis and I will respond or follow. And so we'll leave it up to Reggie. We trust him so much, we know that if he feels like there's a certain piece coming or that ought to be played or a certain mood it ought to go to, we'll go there.
You asked as far as maybe some hints for the audience to kind of see what's going on. I think almost more than what they're hearing, if they just watch us, watch our faces. Because to me, the thing about music is you're communicating with people, and especially if I think the best case scenario, if it's people that you like and people that you trust. And depending on, somebody will have an idea or start something, to watch where it goes almost in real time in a very organic way. I think if they can share, if an audience can share with us that feeling of like what's coming next and are we having a good time, I think they'll get more out of it than a list of criteria about what key are they playing in and what's the song and on that.
And our goal is to engage everybody in the room.
Yeah.
I don't think we're very interested in excluding anybody. There'll be definitely something happen, and Reggie will do something, and Dennis will, there's an eyebrow, that kind of thing.
Is there ever a, not going there? I'm sure the three of you just want to go in that creative.
For me, if you're playing with people that you trust, there are a lot of times in musical situations and groups where you might see that where someone's taking you, you don't really want to go. But usually, I think in the best of groups, there's that connection where it's like, all right,
okay.
All right, let's go.
I didn't see that coming, but that's all right.
The trio served as guest artists and clinicians for the 55th Annual EIU Jazz Festival. Middle school and high school jazz bands from the region came to Eastern in February 2014 for both competition and the opportunity to learn from jazz professionals like Dennis, Jeffrey, Reggie, and EIU jazz faculty.
Literally, I spent hours figuring out one solo to play by singing it and figuring out one note to play. That was work. I got, awards at, soloist awards when we went to jazz festivals like this for playing that little solo that I spent all of those hours figuring out, So I had fun with the band. We performed well in competition, but I did a whole lot of what I had to do so that I could get what I wanted to get. Does that make sense? Yes? Yes? Come on now. Yes. Dedication is doing what you have to do whether you feel like it or not. And so sometimes there's going to be days when you don't really feel like it. I'm just being honest with you. But the reward, the benefit of it is really, you reap huge benefits later in life. That's all I got to say.
For me, one of the greatest thrills in life is to be able to come out here and spontaneously create something. What we did when we've played together for many years together, but when we first came out, I don't know if there's some of you who were watching this, but I walked over to Reggie and I was like, so what should we play? And he said, well, we could do this, we could do that. He said, well, how about Caravan? Okay. So what you just saw, I don't think we've ever actually played that in that way. I don't think we ever even came up with an arrangement or whatever. But it's really, for me, it's the neatest thing in the world to be able to come and be your own individual person. And there are two other individual people. And he makes a sound, he makes a sound, I make a sound, and all of a sudden it becomes one sound. I'll never forget the first time I ever did that when I was your age, it was the coolest thing in the world. So, since I like doing really cool things, we're gonna do this again. What we're gonna play, we have no idea what we're going to play. This is the truth. And let us know what you think after we're done. Hopefully it won't sound bad.
The two-day event kicked off with an opening concert that featured the trio and the EIU Jazz Ensemble under the direction of Dr. Sam Fagley. Let's talk about that educational piece. What kinds of things can you do in a concert setting that will increase their knowledge and exposure, and how do you interact with the students that way? Because you have a limited period of time. I mean, you have a rehearsal or two to put it all together, and you try to maximize that. How do you get the most out of it, both for you and for the students?
Well, I can say that as a younger musician, when I had the opportunity to play with guests that came from out of town or came from across town, it always raised my level because I realized that I was at this point and I wanted to get to here. And just by playing with a person that had more experience, it brings you up because you learn things, you see things, you observe things, and it's a great learning experience.
Yeah, it really sometimes a lot of it will depend on where they are, and hopefully, I think what we will try to do is to observe where they are and what they need, and make them feel as comfortable as possible.
Exactly.
Anytime I've ever been in this situation where someone came, as Jeff said, either from another out of town or an older, more mature musician, they always had a way of filling in the blanks. If something needed to get done, they were sensitive enough to know this is what we need, and to kind of create like a foundation which would make the music go higher. So hopefully they'll feel that way, that we've done that with them.
So in the world of jazz and jazz education, the two of you have been in this world for a period of time. Could you talk just briefly about the changes maybe you've experienced? When we talk about the jazz standards era, jazz was probably a more prominent art form in particular time periods in American life. Has it waned? What are you finding in younger jazz players, whether it's the quality of players, whether it's the knowledge that they're bringing, whether it's the popular culture that's with the YouTube culture, and there's so much more music out there? And what have you seen over your lifetime in jazz that provides us some hope for the future from some of these great young jazz players?
Well, I would say, first of all, the kids are much stronger than when I was that age. Either they have a lot more tools or YouTube or whatever it is, but the skill base is much higher. I think the opportunities to play music is more difficult, so we have to be more creative in finding and making those things happen. That's certainly what I've observed. But I do think they're coming to the table with a much higher set of skills than when you and I were coming up.
There's that definitely, in a way, I'm more encouraged now, because I think what I see with a lot of younger musicians is that because the music is almost matured in so many ways, as far as there's more access to it. So at a younger age, they're hearing a lot more things to where they can start they start much higher than when we were their age. But there's also now, everything is so wide open. There are so many great young players who don't have the boundaries imposed on them. And I think maybe that's what I want to keep coming back to. It's limitless. There's all these different genres, all these different styles of players. So it's like it's anybody's guess where they can go, and they feel in some ways empowered to be able to go anywhere they want. So I'm really positive when I listen to when I go all over the world and you hear a lot of young players who technically can speak the language, but also the imaginations are like, they're wide open to everything. So I think the future's in it is good. In a way, I'm almost feeling that maybe my role now is to try to keep one foot, in where we're going, but also a foot in the tradition, to let them know kind of where this was, to keep the continuity together.
And I think, too, they have a wider spectrum of musical choices.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot more combinatorial elements in music. So world music, jazz, different kind of combinations that weren't necessarily prominent when we were coming up. Mm-hmm. So it's wider.
I think perhaps, Dennis, that supports both of your points earlier, that music is music. Even though a piece might have Americana folk and kick into jazz and end with some kind of blues, and well, how do you classify that? Well, you don't really have to, because it's just music. I think the strength of that is the players. If the players are good and the young people hear, that's a top-notch player. What style was that? I didn't really care, because that was a top-notch player.
Like I say, when you go, the more educated you become, you begin to understand maybe the terminology. Well, this was what this was, or this is what they were doing. But at some point, I think to be able just to start from square one, just realize, well, this is good. Let's just start with that. And as you keep walking down the road in terms of your discovery with music, you'll figure out what it was. But the main thing is just know this is good. It's music. It's not overwhelming. Don't be afraid of it. It's only music.
Well, Jeff and Dennis, we appreciate your being with us and joining with Reggie tonight. I know our crew is waiting to help you finish setting up for the concert. We've got some folks waiting in the wings to help us put all of this together. We're looking forward to the show tonight and for you being a part of the Jazz Festival tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for Backstage at the Doudna. More information about the Doudna Fine Arts Center is available at eiu.edu/Doudna. And to catch up on more episodes of Backstage from past and present seasons, head over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/WEIUTV. We'll see you next time.